Thank you very much, ma'am, for instilling the immense positivity, calmness, and contentment amongst all of us. Now, we are live on YouTube as well and would like to welcome one and all to this path-breaking conference conducted by Center of Economic Analysis and Policy, CEPAR, Department of Economics, KJ Somaiya Institute of Management of Somaiya Vidya Vihar University, jointly with the Finance Academy of Mahindra Leadership University, MLU, National Institute of Securities Market, an educational initiative of SEBI, and the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome all. Now, I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor of Somaiya Vidya Vihar University, Professor Dr. V.N. Rajasekharan Pillai sir, to deliver the inaugural address. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
First of all, let me congratulate the KJ Somaiya Institute of Management, the Department of Economics, and also this forum for organizing this conference on a very timely topic. I also take this opportunity to note the presence, distinguished presence of very eminent economists for this national conference. Dr. Sachchidanand Shukla, who is on our board, who is from Mahindra and Mahindra, Professor Varghese Manaloor, Tandberg Chair in Economics, University of Alberta, Dr. V.R. Narasimhan, Mr. Trivedi, Mr. Sandip Ghose, and all the other distinguished guests who are participating in this event. Let me welcome them on behalf of the Somaiya Vidya Vihar University. I congratulate Dr. Monica Khanna and Professor Shivakumar and the members of the organizing committee for taking time out and then arranging this conference in a very systematic way. I am not an economist. I am not going to give a lecture here, but I have seen the importance of this particular topic, disruptions due to pandemic, how the economics at all levels is affected, how life is affected, and in spite of that, in spite of all these adversities, how we are trying to come out of this crisis. We are talking about post-lockdown economic scenario. I do not know whether it even now it's post-lockdown scenario, because if you just look globally, you can see again recurrence of COVID coming in certain countries in a very, very big way. And therefore, we are definitely trying to live with the pandemic situation, COVID situation. And as a country, we have also seen a lot of disruptions in this country. But in spite of that, we are progressing in a, not in a very big way, but we are progressing satisfactorily. I don't want to analyze the economic, detailed economic analysis of all these things, but I'm very sure that interventions of this kind, interactions and dialogues of this kind will make us aware of the ramifications of such disruptions. And this time it is due to this pandemic. We have seen that our economics, our inventions, our innovations, everything changed during adversities that we have seen, whether it be through world wars or such incidents. We have also seen that lot of innovations happening in life, in technology intervention, in education, in our social life. Everything is happening, and technology has come in handy for us, particularly in education in a country like India. We were thinking of online education and all that, but so far, before pandemic, we have not even we didn't have even one university offering a full-time online program. Now universities are thinking of online education, hybrid mode of education, and our all spheres of our activity have been severely affected, whether it be tourism, whether it be industry, whether it be education, travel, all these things have been severely affected. The sessions which you are doing during this conference, whether it be MSME challenges, technology interventions, interventions in education, all these things are very important. I am sure that the deliberations of this conference will come out as some sort of a recommendations which can be implemented step by step. Interactions, I also see that good number of research papers are going to be presented here. As a university, we are very young, but as an education institutions, we are 72 years old. We have been in the forefront of education. Somaiya Vidya Vihar has been in the forefront of education, humanities, social sciences, management, technology, or in all areas, cultural studies, in all these areas we have been excelling, but now we are functioning as a university, and KJ Somaiya Institute of Management is one of the, not one of the most prominent institution of Somaiya Vidya Vihar University in terms of its acceptance of its academic programs as well as in terms of its research. This institution is doing excellently well, and a lot of interests are coming for national and international collaboration with KJ Somaiya Institute of Management. Professor Shivakumar, who is also the Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Science of the university, he is also trying to put maybe new programs in economics and related areas in the university. Good number of researchers. Yesterday we have decided that we will create a full-time research culture in the KJ Somaiya Institute of Management by creating full-time research positions, full-time research positions for youngsters. Presentation of research papers by research scholars and teachers is very important, but at the same time, we should be very cautious about the quality of the research papers. There are a lot of online publications, all these things are coming coming handy to us, but we have to ensure that the quality of the publication, we have to ensure the quality of the publications. We will definitely say they are all refereed and all that, but we should ensure that the publications which are coming out of, particularly from youngsters, should have topmost quality in all sense. Because even in research, there are a lot of untoward things happening in several countries. Maybe starting journals specifically to get papers published only. Such things are happening, such untoward things are happening in research, refereeing, and also publication at national and international level. It is not only a problem with a country like India, it is all over the world. As a scientist, I know that there are a lot of untoward things happening to get papers published. I am sure that an institution of this kind and an organization like CEPAR will definitely look at the quality parameters in research, and I'm sure that this conference will pave the way. And I know that it's a continuous series. It is the seventh in its series, seventh annual conference, and it has a tradition. And very eminent economists are participating. I have had occasion to interact with them in different capacities, maybe selection committee experts and all that. I'm sure that this interaction with the students, teachers, researchers, and the economists from industry, that will pave the way for a solid foundation for economic research and analysis of the post-COVID situation, and provide us ways and means to face the situation in the right perspective. Once again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Of course, definitely I will listen to the conference. At least I will try to understand what are the things going to happen, and probably I will get back to you towards the end of the conference again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the offer.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your views and giving us a holistic outlook about research and studies. Now, I request the director of our institute, Dr. Monica Khanna ma'am, to deliver the welcome address. The stage is all yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I would like to, on behalf of the Somaiya Vidyavihar University, the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor, the Registrar, and all the management, and my faculty colleagues at KJ Somaiya Institute of Management, and specifically the Economics Department colleagues, I give all of you a very warm welcome to the 7th Annual International Conference by the Center for Economic Policy and Analysis of at KJ Somaiya Institute of Management. Indeed, it's a very proud moment for all of us. 7 is a very lucky number, and the type of dignitaries and the delegates that have come here today for the conference, I'm sure it's going to be a very good 2 days for full of interaction and networking and learning opportunities. As Professor Pillai has said, our Vice Chancellor has said that he is no economist. In the same manner, I'm no economist, but as an academic administrator and as a professor of marketing, I have been, like all of you, I've been also reading the papers and trying to get some information and get some assessment of what is the economic environment that is there today. I do believe that it is very necessary to evaluate the economic environment that has prevailed upon us due to the unprecedented global lockdown situation, and that too in an era of global connectedness. None of us in our wildest dreams could ever imagine that the world would just come to a grinding halt in this manner. This is something that even the best of science fiction writers would not have thought about. But this is something that all of us have faced for the past 1 year, and the challenges have been many for us to surmount. But with all the cooperation with all the faculty, the colleagues, and all the stakeholders, we have been able to get through in good measure. Another thing that crossed my mind, or what I thought about, was that with every passing generation, there is a continuous evolution of thoughts and solutions by the next generation of scientists and economists for the problems prevalent in business and our societies. Simultaneously, there is being presented to us the phenomenon of continuous and rapid rise in opportunities and challenges of transformation, survival, and growth due to unforeseen disruptions in the business, technology, and social environment, and not necessarily in any particular order. There will be obsolescence of existing knowledge and skill sets. The new markets and economic environment will work around competition and disruption led by technological advances. This is what I have understood after reading various articles on the economic scenario. What I can visualize today is the situations in which companies and various business sectors may find themselves in. One of them I thought was it would be defined, maybe a sector could be defined by high competition and high disruption. Now all these companies could be technology-based companies that require continuous innovation and invention for basic survival and growth. The other sector I felt was defined by high competition but low disruption, typically sectors with low differentiation opportunities. Now, this is another challenge by itself, because if you're in a highly competitive environment, you need to keep on identifying the differentiating factors to be one up on the competition. The other sector I thought that in which companies and institutions may find themselves is high disruption and low competition. Now, this requires continuous upgradation of knowledge and skill sets for ensuring survival. I'm not too sure, but the education sector might be finding itself somewhere here, because not only are we finding there is a lot of competition, but there's also a lot of disruption that's happening today. The other sector which I felt where companies and institutions could find themselves is low disruption and no competition at all. Now, I do believe in today's situation and scenario, it's very difficult to find such sectors. Companies will have to find their coping mechanisms. Whichever sector they find themselves in, they'll have to find their coping mechanisms. There will be many organizational dilemmas also on the way, but economic survival and growth will depend upon how best companies are able to assess risk and manage the various crisis situations. The ability to adapt to changes and not get easily discouraged by failures will be the key to handle difficult and disruptive economic and business situations in the future. I'm sure many of these topics are going to be discussed today. They're going to be debated today. by the most erudite speakers in the next 2 days of this very illustrious conference. Such conferences are excellent learning and networking opportunities, and I'm sure all the participants and speakers will have great takeaways from the conference deliberations. I wish you all the very good luck for a very successful outcome of this conference. I invite you to the campus. I'm sure within the next few months, the campus will be fully active, and I hope that we can meet face to face. I welcome you to the campus and I welcome you again next year for these conferences. Thank you so much and wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for taking us through various sectors and for your delightful speech. We have with us our own faculty, Dr. SNV Sevkumaran, Professor and Area Chairperson of Economics at KJ Somaiya Institute of Management. He has over 30 years of teaching and research experience and has been associated with KJ Somaiya Institute of Management since 2003. We welcome you, sir. We would kindly request you to chair the session and address the audience with your opening remarks. The spotlight is all yours, sir.
Thank you. Greetings as per the time zones of the participants. I thank all those who have joined this conference this morning, despite your busy schedules. The latest figure that I receive is 40 persons are attending this conference at the moment, but the ones who have registered for this conference who would be attending tomorrow, being a non-working day for many, they deserve a special mention. They are from different states, from Andhra Pradesh, Anantapur, Rajahmundry, Bhimavaram, Srikalahasti, Delhi, IIT Delhi, Gujarat, it's a Gujarat University, Karnataka, Jain University, Bangalore, Madhya Pradesh, Government MUM, Bhopal, Maharashtra, besides Mumbai, other places like Jalgaon, Aurangabad, Bharati Vidyapit, Navi Mumbai, Odisha, there is a participation. There is some participation from Rajasthan, from Telangana, Hyderabad, Naipur, professors and faculty from Shatavahana University, Karimnagar, from Tamil Nadu, Erode, there is participation. From within our Somaiya Vidya Vihar University campus, besides our own KJ Somaiya Institute of Management, faculty, scholars, and students, we also have participation of faculty members and a few students from SK Somaiya College, some consultancy firms, individual professionals, 8 CFOs from the Mahindra group. The chief economist of Mahindra is very much present here in our midst. 4 speakers from abroad, 3 from United States. They are all professors in economics from reputed US universities. 1 from Canada, who is very much present in our midst, Professor Varghese Manaloor. 16 speakers in all. And we have just heard the speeches by the Vice Chancellor, the Dean of Management Studies and Director SIMSR. We also have in our midst the Dean of NISM, former Director NISM, Professor Sandip Ghose. Partner organization, there is a participation from NISM, students, faculty members, from BCCI, from National Stock Exchange, other central government organizations like NITI, SEBI, 3 DGMs are participating, and every other member whom I could not individually acknowledge. I thank for your participation and also for showing some kind of interest in our 2-day conference. Now, I'm given 10 minutes time to give my opening remarks for this session. Roughly 1.5 to 2 minutes I have utilized in acknowledging the presence of different members from various parts of the country, as well as certain organizations to which they belong to. Now I have 6 slides in all. I would be briefly mentioning about the title and would be presenting to you about 4 or 5 points in each slide. First, global growth, dull but hope ahead. Reviving economic growth or changing the rate of output of the global economy is a huge but certainly an urgent challenge before the corporate, national, and global decision makers. The world output or the world GDP has simply declined by 4.23% between 2019 and 2020, in absolute current market prices, the decline has been from US dollars 87.552 trillion to 83.845 trillion. Though absolutely it looks like it is just a roughly $4 trillion decline in absolute terms, what it could have otherwise been somewhere around 91 trillion US dollars. So there is, in a way, compared to the trend, a decline of about $7 trillion, which is significant. The world GDP value in 2001, it was recorded at 33.431 trillion US dollars in current prices. But subsequently, over the past two decades till 2020, it has risen by about 50 trillion US dollars to 83.845 trillion. That is substantial. So the world has got used to registering decent growth rates all these 2 decades, thanks to a lot of economic reforms initiated by different countries around the world. As per the IMF latest forecast, the world output is expected to rise steadily to US dollars 113.482 trillion by 2025. That means the international organizations are expecting the normalcy to restore very soon, and substantial nearly 5% growth for the world economy on a yearly growth for the next 5 years ahead. The COVID pandemic has affected adversely almost every economy around the world, effectively through the calendar 2020. Though the pandemic has severely impacted all the economies around the first half, thankfully, it was less harsher during the second half of the calendar 2020, following government's relaxations, greater public awareness, and the relentless work of scientists, medical practitioners, and other frontline warriors. Next, poverty. Poor and rich countries are on par as far as this socio-economic problem is concerned. Shrinking of GDP in absolute value has shattered lives of many workers, mainly in the unorganized sector. Poor became poorer, despite food and other essential commodities supplied freely and generously in most nations without succumbing to the fiscal rules and laws such as India's FRBM Act 2003. As the International Labour Organization, ILO, long back, in its declaration in Philadelphia, 1944, has stated, poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. A sudden rise in the poverty is a global danger, and it must be tackled urgently. Data and information received from various official sources established that populations in the developing countries are not the only ones who are pushed into deeper poverty by the COVID pandemic. Even the world's largest economy, the US, the economic impact of COVID has been equally severe. As per the Bloomberg, US suffered sharpest rise in poverty rate in more than 50 years in the year 2020, almost 12% poverty. Some citizens in Southern California, one of the developed states in the US, some citizens, they are sleeping in their cars, making that as the home each night for almost 1 year now. That reflects the magnitude of poverty. Third, growth revival, multiple views. Using economics jargon, the concave-shaped production possibility curve shrank and shifted closer towards the origin due to the pandemic. It needs to be restored back to the 2019 levels initially and further expanded at about a positive 3 to 4% growth rate each year for the world economy in the coming years. That is what even the IMF has predicted. It has predicted even a better growth rate of nearly 5%. Historically, global growth experience suggests that severe shocks of this magnitude equivalent to the COVID-19, they required several years to restore the economic normalcy, and there is no magic wand. Governments too have fiscal accountability, financial and institutional constraints to be more liberal than what they are presently. There has been a plethora of optimistic, pragmatic, pessimistic outlooks on growth revival strategies. All views or outlooks must be valued by the national and global policymakers for arriving at a collective wisdom in designing such extraordinary policy measures to handle this extraordinary crisis. Supposedly, the worst one after the Great Depression of 1929-36. If one seeks an opinion on the possible shape of or the course of recovery path, one would hear several English alphabets like J, U, V, W, or Z. One must wait for some years more to ascertain the correct alphabet resembling the realized recovery path. Labor productivity is the key. Labor productivity is one of the huge areas for improvement for many countries. As per the World Population Review, the latest available data for January 21, Norway, Luxembourg, United States, Belgium, Netherlands, they have average hourly productivity in the range of US $60 to 75, with world average around 33 US dollars per person per hour. Some Asian economies, namely Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, they have extremely low average hourly labor productivity, which is in the region of 1.98 to 8.5 US dollars. This must be improved by deploying higher share of capital, use of better technologies, and HR practices. National growth revival strategies must have labor productivity as the top priority for a higher global benefit, besides caring for the environment. The triple bottom line principle must be adhered to in letter and spirit. After 3 decades of embracing to the concept of globalization, protectionism and deglobalization are becoming most valued policies again. Walk out and walk in into the global institutions at will are some dangerous trends we are seeing recently. Any economic growth strategy must result in improvement in primary, secondary, or tertiary sectors. Each responsible nation capitalizes on its abundant resource and sector, which assumes the most ROCE, return on capital employed, besides absorption of, say, the labor force, which is a priority for most populous nations like India and China. The new normal, many adjustments needed. Most contribution to the global growth over the next few years is expected from Asia, and other continents are likely to contribute lesser amounts to the world output and growth. Geopolitical changes in the cooperation in 2021 and next 3 to 4 years may surprise many economists and institutions that had predicted the roles of select nations before the COVID pandemic and the US electoral results. US dollars 30 trillion would be added in next just 5 years. Some new ways and means of cooperation among economic agents, new and innovative ways beyond work from home or work from anywhere, may make us more resilient to beat the COVID-like challenges without getting into panic mode again if and when they occur in future. At a firm or organizational level, employees must start reorienting now to work with newer teams, different policies than what they were familiar barely a year ago, new processes, new clients, new public policies, and in short, to a new paradigm called the new normal. Employees, besides working in their own organizations, they may now have to function from home, car, villages, resorts, or from anywhere, and probably with flexible timings too, primarily in the services sector. Government of India, Ministry of Labor, is planning a 4-day week for workers with 48-hour weekly work and 12-hour per day work as an option. Greater cooperation, faster the revival. Sooner we adjust to these changes, faster we overcome the economic crisis. After all, economy is nothing more than money value of the magnitude of cooperation and coordination between various economic agents and institutions for commercially and socially desirable outcomes within the legal frameworks. Greater the degree of such cooperation, higher is the output and better would be the outcomes. By end January 2021, as many as 92 countries are reportedly approached India for locally made COVID-19 shots. As the word spreads that Indian vaccine is showing negligible side effects. Keeping India's own vaccine administration schedule and interests, India has already dispatched to several countries the vaccine as a gesture and as part of its global diplomacy. It's my pleasure to be the session chair for the track 1 titled Economic Growth Revival. I thank the organizing committee of CEPAR, Department of Economics, for giving me this opportunity. I welcome each of the esteemed speakers who is present here and extend them my best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your thoughts on the revival of economic growth. Now, I would like to introduce our invited expert for today, who will deliver the expert talk about the theme, Growth Initiatives and Key Imperative for India. Dr. Sachchidanand Shukla is currently working as the Chief Economist of the Mahindra Group. He has over 20 years of experience in spanning capital market and financial services. Prior to joining the Mahindra Group, he was associated with Access Capital as Chief Economist. His key areas of research have been financial markets, strategy, development policy, program implementation, and impact evaluation. He earned a Ph.D. degree in financial economics from Birla Institute of Technology and postgraduate qualifications in business management and finance, as well as in economics from the University of Mumbai, and has been a recipient of KJ Somaiya Gold Medal. We welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. Good morning, everyone. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Sivkumar, Dr. Monica Khanna, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of this. Gaurav and Radhika, I just wanted to tell you, I thought this will be blasphemous if I don't use any slides because you're a management institute of repute, right? I didn't want to commit this blasphemy. And let me try and attempt putting up some slides for everyone to see. So please bear with me as I put it on.
Sure, sure. It's visible, sir.
Right. So over the course of the next, say, 15 minutes, I'll just give you some snapshots on the economic growth revival strategy. I will be using largely the lens of the budget, but let me give you some background. Dr. Sivkumar has already given a beautiful sort of a backdrop as to what has really happened. Let me just add to that and take that thread forward. As you all know, context matters most in economics and policy making, right? And let me just add some of these. Let me point out some facts before we try and understand this better. So if you look at what has happened, I describe this shock as a na bhuto na bhavishyati kind of a shock, right? It's unprecedented, unparalleled in history. Why do I say that? Some pointers here. This is March 2020. IMF came up with a forecast saying 160 countries are going to have per capita income growth in 2020. Come April, and it said 180 countries are going to experience negative per capita growth. More than 90 countries requested IMF for emergency funding. Now, this is way beyond what they got during the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, which we all relate to because it was the most recent. And more than $100 billion worth of portfolio of outflows happened from emerging markets. Again, this is more than 3 times what we saw during the global financial crisis. The IMF has now estimated that we've lost output. I mean, they had this number at 9 odd trillion, but it is estimated to be close to 12 trillion in terms of the potential output lost. So this is the kind of context we have so that we can evaluate our outcomes and going forward. A couple of points that I wanted to highlight and wanted everybody to probably appreciate. First, I think we have all been hit by the same storm, but we are all in different boats. The outcomes are going to be completely different depending on what country, what sort of a balance sheet are you a corporate, are you a household. Each person is going to be impacted differently. Now, this is probably the worst shock in terms of our economic history last 100 odd years. And what is very interesting to note is that this was one of the most democratized shocks that we have seen, the most democratized recessions that we have seen. Everybody got hit. I just showed you that statistic. 180 countries were likely to have negative per capita income, and that was in a very short span of time. The entire world got hit. It didn't matter whether you're rich or poor or wherever you are, which part of the world you are. And therefore, I think this has been completely unprecedented. This is why I call it na bhuto na bhavishyati. Hopefully, we never have such a shock again. Entire, say, spectrum of humanity got hit because of this. Let me just qualify the statement. What do I mean by different boats? Just look at Europe, the continent of Europe. They have one of the best, they are a developed part of our world, and they have one of the best healthcare systems in the world, right? Very renowned social security, health systems, etc. But look at the outcomes. It's very different for different countries. Look at each one of these: Germany, Italy, UK, France. Everybody's got hit very, very differently, despite having the best of these healthcare facilities. Similarly, it didn't matter whether you're rich or poor. Like I said, look at United States. We all thought this was the seat of global capitalism. This is the world's strongest, largest, whatever adjective you want to use. But look at the outcome. It has been the worst hit, right? And therefore, what I meant by different boats is everybody's gotten hit by COVID, but the outcomes are completely different. Now, let me come to India. We are lucky that we have some sort of a control. I mean, scientists and everybody is struggling with the reasons how and why. But I think an important point that I want to make is the impact also differs from state to state. And we all conventionally think that states that are that have higher share of services or manufacturing are better placed, right? But what this shock has shown us is that it's actually the states which depended more on agriculture have come out better in this pandemic, right? So this is what I meant by different boats, but the same storm. A very important thing, all of us need to have the bird's eye view as well as the worm's eye view. So this is the bird's eye view. I'm sure each one of you relates to these pictures. And this I refer to as the worm's eye view. Why is it important? So let me just tell you, this is the bird's eye view. This is what the IMF says. After multiple iterations, they believe the world economy is going to shrink by 3.5. This is their latest projection from January 21. And there is a V-shaped sort of a recovery. But this will hide, and similarly for advanced economies, everywhere you can see the V, I mean, emerging markets and developing, etc. Now, you need to have the worm's eye view. You need to be watching closer to the ground. And just look at this. Indian GDP is going to contract by anywhere between 7 to 8% in FY21, right? But this is a broad average. There are multiple sectors that are going to be doing far worse than the GDP, which is the average, right? Just look at air traffic. Some of these are services segments. Some of these are manufacturing. Air traffic is likely to be down minus 50 to 60. Hotels and restaurants, similar magnitude. Real estate, CV sales, PV, passenger vehicle sales, and capital goods, etc. So you can see that the 7-8%, the bird's eye view, the IMF, forecasts and the GDP numbers won't tell you the entire story. You need to be aware of what's happening much closer to the ground. And like I said, there are sectors that are hit badly. There'll be sectors that will really benefit, that will fly, right? Based on technology and manufacturing segments. A lot of them have revived, and therefore you need to be aware of this differential. Another thing that I want everybody to relate with is the level of output, which I represent by this picture, and the growth rate. So as all of you know, the Indian economy in real terms is likely to grow at say 10 to 12%, right? Anywhere between 10 to 12% in real terms. And this is going to be the fastest ever in our recorded history, right? In real terms. But as you know, GDP is also what we together, all of us combined put together, right? So this is what we call as the GDP, the level of output. Even with 11-12% real GDP growth rate, right? Which is YY, that there is a lot of statistical impact and base effect over there. And which is why let's not get carried away by this 11-12% number. Let's also look at the level of output, where the level of output is probably going to be equal even after 8 quarters to the FY20 numbers, right? So you get the difference. FY20 level of output and 8 quarters hence will probably be just about matching that output despite 11 or 12% real GDP growth. What are we doing to get out of this? I think the world has used this template. I mean, this seems some kind of a joke, but unfortunately it's not, right? When you borrow to spend, you're creating this debt pile and you're borrowing from the future. Somebody has to pay for it, right? If you look at these statistics, global debt to GDP has gone up dramatically, right? I mean, it was high even before COVID, but now everybody's really pumping in money. We are throwing money at the problem, and India has also tried to go down that path. And let me give you some say elements from the budget now. Just look at the fiscal deficit, right? It's gone up from 4.6 odd to about 9.5, and the government says will go down. I mean, to about 4.5 by 26 FY26. Now borrowings are going to touch a record level in FY21. 14 trillion rupees, right? 14 lakh crores is going to be borrowed. And just look at the average has typically been in net terms, we've borrowed about 5 odd trillion. But in FY21, we are going to borrow 10 trillion rupees. And this is going to remain elevated because the fiscal and the fiscal deficits are also going to remain elevated. So fiscal deficit as well as debt to GDP have gone up dramatically and will remain elevated. This is what I meant by the debt part. But let me make a remark here. I think this is a bold move, audacious move by the government, because they have realized that they have to do the heavy lifting. RBI, if say year 20 was driven by RBI, I mean, they pumped in a lot of liquidity. This year has to be driven by the government. They have to take the lead because private sector balance sheets or household balance sheets are not in a position to drive growth. And therefore, they have taken a conscious call saying that we will borrow and spend. And the strategy seems to be to grow the denominator. So I call it audacious because this is for the first time that the government has taken a conscious call in terms of growing the GDP. I mean, the denominator, right? If that really goes up, hopefully over time, people really benefit at large. And I'm not talking about the trickle down, but essentially something similar, given the kind of backdrop we've had. Now, one important point that I want to make is, because this is such a humongous shock, like I said, the world has not seen anything quite like this. We should be judging the budget with respect to the fact that one budget, 1 year, cannot undo the entire damage. So that is the caveat that I want you to have at the back of your mind. Part of this is some cleanup. I mean, we earlier used to have the food subsidy, which was off balance sheet. It was not shown in the budget numbers. Now you can see this green bar. They have decided to put it in the fiscal deficit numbers, and it is above the line, as we call it, right? And therefore, this has imparted some sort of transparency. The budget numbers are much more transparent. But the key thing is this: you can take debt, you can borrow, but somebody has to repay it over time. So it's not the first time that we've seen a spike. Just take you back to 2000 to say 2003-4. Just look at the way the debt to GDP really zoomed, right? But thereafter, something dramatic happened, and we went down all the way to 50-odd%. And this was held by high growth. So the denominator comes into play. And the other thing is inflation, high inflation. So we have to reflate our way out of trouble. And this is exactly what happened. Can we repeat this? I think it's going to be a different sort of a world. Yes, we are seeing inflation, but earlier the RBI did not have a mandate of targeting a particular rate of inflation. So I think this is going to be the trick. If we are not able to get the GDP going, we are heavily laden with debt, and somebody somehow has to repay that. The other part is the recovery from here on. So don't think of this as a budget for just this year. It has to put in place the building blocks of future growth. The recovery is going to be multi-speed. I showed you some sectors that are going to be badly impacted. There will be sectors which will really fly, right? So the recovery, while GDP growth numbers will be say -7, -8, FY21 and 11 or 12 in FY22, sectors and entities will behave differently, right? So this is trying to give you a picture of how different entities will really behave in this pandemic. As you know, these are some themes that the budget has come up with: infrastructure, privatization, healthcare, and the financial services. I think infra bet is very, very important, very interesting. What the budget has done is the expenditure is going to rely on capital expenditure, right? So there are two components: revenue expenditure, capital expenditure. They're relying on capital expenditure to build infrastructure, which we badly need. Capex to GDP ratio will go up from 1.8 to 2.5% of GDP. Now, these typically have higher multipliers, right? For 1 unit of rupee spent, you get say X rupees worth of output. I mean, just trying to give you the multiplier. NIPFP and some of the reputed research bodies have said it could be as high as 2.5% at least, 2.5 times, sorry. Now, this means that if 2.5% of GDP worth of capex is done, you can expect 6% impact on, at least 6% impact on GDP growth. Similarly, on the privatization side, I think what the government is saying that there are no holy cows anymore. I think this is a very, very important signal for all of us. There are no holy cows. The government will walk out of most sectors. Even within the 4 strategic sectors, they will see as to which companies are absolutely critical. And this to me is a big signal, especially public sector banks. I mean, all we've heard so far is the government will bring down or should bring down the shareholding below 51%. Now they're saying, no, nothing doing. We are going to sell these away if they don't perform. Healthcare again is critical. I think we've woken up to the fact that if you don't pay adequate attention, it can impact everything, right from your GDP to incomes to everything. And therefore, it's been a neglected part of our spending. We've been spending just about 1% of GDP. And this needs to go up. Everybody pays lip service, but we haven't really adequately cared. The other bit is the financial sector. I think the focus on creating DFIs, privatization, insurance, FDI, etc., are really going to help the credit cycle going. And you can't expect GDP growth of 5, 6, 7% without a commensurate or similar, say, growth rate in the credit cycle. We know what has happened with ILFS. Some banks have gone bust, etc. And therefore, unless you have this oxygen supply of credit, it's difficult to sustain growth over time. This is just something on the infrastructure pipeline. I think, again, an important break. The government is saying we will sell off some of these assets, right? And including land, etc. And this is an important break because the government is sitting on a lot of assets. what they're saying is we will monetize these and will not go and tax the same set of people every year, right? I mean, because you have reached the limits in a country of 130 crore people. Just about 1.5 crore people pay these income taxes. Yes, indirect taxes are paid by everyone, but I think we have what I'm trying to say is we have a very narrow base, and therefore the government has tried to identify another source of revenue, and then hopefully this will be put to work. Again, I think manufacturing is going to be a big driver. There is a big emphasis. Everybody's been trying to move out of China, at least having a China plus one kind of shift. And there is some statistic put out by Bernstein Research, and they say 10% of the companies that have moved out of China have gone to India. So let's not self-flagellate. Let's not keep talking about Vietnam, which has got bulk of these. I think over time, with right set of policies, India will benefit from this trend as well. So why do I believe manufacturing and industrial performance is going to be improving? With the focus is corporate tax rates have been cut, labor reforms, which every economist has been talking about for the last 20 years at least, have come in, and there is this PLI scheme and entire focus on Atmanirbhar and the like. Combined with GST and some of the other reforms on formalization, I think this is going to be a big driver of growth and jobs. So job creation is going to be extremely important, and this will be taken care of by that. So this, I think we've covered. And lastly, I think the world has, the IMF, the likes of IMF have given a license to the developed economies saying you can print money till 2025. There is no problem because your growth rate is going to be higher than the rate of interest that you borrow these funds at. And therefore, what this does is so much money pumped in the global economy can lead to asset bubbles. So there's a beautiful cartoon put out by late R.K. Lakshman, right? So this is what you're seeing currently. The Sensex and the stock market have gone through the roof, right? So there is asset inflation that you're seeing now. It can manifest in commodity prices, it can manifest in equities or any particular asset class. And if the advanced economies continue to print the way they are doing, it will inevitably lead to some problems for us, because for corporates, it can be rise in input costs. For the economy, it could be rise in your twin deficits, right? The fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. So I think I'll pause there, and maybe if we have time, we can take some questions. So thank you so much for listening so patiently, and thank you, Dr. Sivakumar, for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, sir. We definitely need to be aware and have different perspectives with respect to the economic growth. Our next speaker is Dr. Manaloor. Dr. Varghese A. Manaloor, Ph.D., John P. Tandberg Chair in Economics, University of Alberta, Augustana campus, Alberta, Canada. Recently, he has been involved in the Augustana Field Experience Program of Tours to India. His research interests are focused on environmental and development economics, policy, and conservation issues. A current research project involves assessing the economic consequences of greenhouse gas emissions in the agricultural sector. Dr. Varghese Manaloor would speak on the theme Teaching and Learning Challenges under International Perspectives. We would now request Dr. Manaloor to take over.
Thank you, Gaurav. And good morning to you all. It's 10 o'clock at night here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir. You are loud and clear.
Okay, great. I will need, I'm hoping I can get the share screen here.
Yes, sir. Right in the.
Okay, I got it. Okay, good morning again. Eminent Vice Chancellor, Professor Pillai, Professor Shivakumar, and Professor Monica Khanna, and people in Somaiya Institute. It's a privilege to be speaking here, halfway around the world here. The other part, it's minus 30 degrees centigrade here. I'm pretty sure it's pretty warm there, but it has been cold the whole week. But I'm going to being an economist, I'm going to do something different here today because it's about teaching and learning in an era of COVID-19. That's what I have titled. That's the title I put for my talk here today. And the reason obviously is there are challenges in this learning environment. So what I'm going to share with you all is some of my experiences and what some of the strategies have been and what some of the challenges have been. So that's what I'm going to do. As Gaurav mentioned, I was there last January and students and I returned from India on January 22nd, 2020. And a month later, a month and a half later, everything was on lockdown. But I remember my time in Somaiya Institute. We spent some time there and in Mumbai and in other parts. But you can see a classroom setting, a lecture that was happening there. It obviously cannot happen anymore. And after I came back, obviously this is what, oops, sorry. This is what was there. We were all holed up in our offices, and right now we are all not even in the office. We are doing everything from our homes, but moving from an in-person or face-to-face learning to a remote or online learning environment here. And that's what I'm going to share, my experiences, some of the challenges and what it means for us. So January 30, 2020, World Health Organization, WHO, declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic and a global health emergency. And later on March 11, 2020, WHO declares COVID-19 as a pandemic. And that's when things shut down. And as has been mentioned by a couple of the previous speakers, everything came to a standstill. And there was a huge disruption. And from an economic point of view, obviously that disruption has happened before in situations, and this is also a disruption that allowed some areas to grow quite a bit, especially the technology and the health sector. But the other sectors, as was pointed out, there is a negative growth in quite other sectors here. It has posed challenges, and on March 17th, the University of Alberta, where I teach, moved from in-person or face-to-face classes to online teaching, and we are continuing that even now. And we just got word we will continue that till August 31st. We don't have summer classes here, but till April we are online, and then it is going to continue till August too. So getting adjusted to working remotely is becoming a fact of life right now. And the future could be some hybrid model that universities would be thinking on. So what did it do when March 17th, when we started online teaching? Obviously, it was a major disruption. Nobody was prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for it. And we were used to face-to-face in-person classes and interacting with students and faculty and other people on campus. All of a sudden, all those came to a standstill. We didn't have much time to transition. We were like responding to a crisis, and it was a crisis, rightly so. And responding to it, at least from my perspective, my thinking was, what can I do to get my students complete their term here? So that was an important task the university had. And I think as faculty members, we all responded to it. And somehow we thought we need to make sure the students get what they need from the classes on the courses that they have, even if it's not all material that we have to cover, but at least they can graduate with on time. So that was an important factor in responding to the crisis. It was a steep learning curve for students and professors. I will admit that. For some of us, it was a little bit more than others, but nevertheless, there was a learning curve. We had support from the campus, the IT side, in terms of making those transitions, but there was no choice but to learn and use the technology to teach and learn in an online environment. And so there was an expectation of some level of digital literacy. And I'll talk more about that later on as to where the inequities could be there in terms of who's prepared and what type of access people, either professors or students have, and how it is differentiated between developing and developed countries here. So as I mentioned, the courses were not planned with online teaching in mind. Most of us had about a week to make the transition, rejig the course or revise some of our course material. Obviously, we had to communicate that to the students in our course outlines, and we had to communicate the revised course expectations. And within the North American context, this worked out well, but I'm not sure all places in India would work similar because of the rigidity of the curriculum and the exam system that is there. Again, I'll touch on that later on in my talk. This session is more about economic growth and revival strategies. So I thought I put one slide at least to show what has been the growth of online platforms. And technological change has made it possible for many universities to offer massive open online courses known as MOOCs. And this was happening even before the pandemic came. So there were a lot of MOOC courses that the University of Alberta offers, or many of the other larger universities offer. So this was all happening online at that time. However, several platforms that help deliver content have been developed since. COVID-19 has demonstrated that fusion of technology and education is possible. The big question is this the way forward? Will a lot of higher education institutions adopt this as the way forward, or will there be a hybrid way? What would be the challenges? If you think about what we are doing now, using Zoom to run this conference, this wasn't happening before, right? Or this was happening, but not in the extent that we are doing it now. But COVID-19 essentially has disrupted that type of content delivery onto everyone here. And that has happened and seems to have worked well. Education technology or EdTech innovation was already taking place before the pandemic, but it is likely to accelerate with companies driving innovation and trying to find their own niche markets. And I just Googled quickly today to look at what these companies are, and there are a lot of startups that are there looking at the education technology sector to see where they can fit. So there will be a huge growth in this area in relation to education for sure. Baiju, which is a Bangalore-based educational technology firm, which was founded in 2011, is currently one of the most valued edtech companies. And there are several others. Some examples are Blackboard, Teachers Pay Teachers, Coursera, Moodle, eClass, or other learning management systems that universities tend to use here. Shift to online environment, the adjustment process. The big thing is, for me and to a lot of my colleagues and others, is to become realistic as to what can be done within an online environment. First thing is to recognize that all things cannot be done that we were doing in the in-person classes cannot be achieved in an online environment. So we had to identify what are the things that are important and set key learning goals and desired outcomes and try to make sure at least those are delivered in a way that students can benefit here. There is an amount of risk taking while doing online teaching, at least from my perspective, and also for students, I would say. One thing is be willing to feel uncomfortable and make use of new opportunities that an online learning and teaching environment provides. What I mean by feeling uncomfortable or trying to take risks, there might be times when there could be something happen and your technology may fail at that brief period of time. And then you have to come back again and think about how you want to continue on. So it's not that you leave everything and go. You need to be willing to be patient and see how things work out. And this I've heard from students too in my comments from our end of term comments, we have heard and read about comments from students related to that. Tasks that are there, I think the key is to simplify, keep things simple and straightforward, communicate regularly with students, ask for feedback, find ways to engage students within the online environment. It's great to see people face to face, but within the online environment, how can we engage students? Again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Connecting with students is important, bringing some human element to online teaching. So some of us, when we were discussing some of these things, should we go synchronous, asynchronous? Should we play videos, record ourselves and play the videos only and let the students understand understand the material based on the videos? I think those are good, but what I have learned is seeing an instructor's face, even if it's a video, having that face is important from a student perspective here. So some of the challenges and some of the things that we were concerned about, and those are both categories are there, professors and students, how to deliver content. So PowerPoint is great, video is great, but still how to make it available to students so that everybody is comfortable and they are learning things that needs to be covered. Feeling of being overwhelmed, at least when this started, it is there. Even to some extent, it is now when as we continue with online classes still. Not familiar with what to expect. I have been teaching in person all these years, and now all of a sudden the change. So that adjustment process and expectations and what will happen is still an unfamiliar territory. Although a lot of those adjustments have happened now, but still it was when we started, and in the fall when we did our fall semester from September to December, that unfamiliar territory was still there. For a student learning perspective, setting expectation, how to create good learning experience becomes important. How to engage students on, I have a small computer screen, let's say, and if it's larger classes, Zoom will allow 20, 25 faces. How do I still engage students becomes important. What effective online teaching strategies can be developed? How do I look at class participation? How do I work with them, work with students? How do I develop intimacy in a virtual setting? Becomes important. As we do the online teaching, which means like when I start my classes, obviously my students are now taking classes from all over the world. Some are as I'm in a different time zone now. Compared to you all in India, my students are from India, from China, from Africa, some parts in Africa, from Malaysia. So obviously they are struggling with the same aspects that I or others may be struggling with time zone, but still you need to develop that relationship. So one of the easiest ways would be to start with good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or end with time to go to bed for some of them, right? As it will be for me after the session is over. And then there are challenges of assessment too, right? And I will talk about those assessment later. Students have similar things. I think feeling overwhelmed, a feeling of being overwhelmed. So the adjustment was there for them too. For a lot of our students, even in Canada, especially in the rural areas, the internet connections are not the best. And just imagine if students are taking these courses from developing countries or even parts of India where the internet connection may not be that great. So there is a great dependency on how they perform and how they learn and how they participate on proper hardware, software, internet connection. So those challenges are there. As I said, they are in different time zones. The bigger question is how do they contact with their peers? Like how do they know who's in class? How do they contact each other? And there could be strategies developed related to that, and I will be talking about that too. And learning with peers and assessment also, like assessment for faculty from a faculty perspective, assessment from a student perspective is also important. So let me quickly look at some opportunities and challenges, and I have clubbed them together in a few slides. The issue of synchronous versus asynchronous. Some students want recordings that are available, and we have started to make those recordings available, but because of connectivity and mainly because of time zone issues. So some feel that they will not be able to participate in the lectures or attend the lectures because of time zones or poor connectivity. So it becomes important to have some strategies where they can also learn. What I have done is I have tried to provide all my notes on the learning management system that we have, eClass, and the students are able to prepare based on that. But also I do short recordings. Even though I'm doing the synchronous classes, there are some recordings available. As I said, I start with my class with good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and end with have a good rest of the day or a good sleep. Group work has been a challenge in the online environment. In some cases, I assign group works, especially groups of 2. And at the start of the term, these are assignments that I give. But within an online environment, I ask students in which time zones they are, and then ask them to work with a student who is in the same time zone. So at least from their perspective, I'm mindful of the challenges, or as faculty or as a professor, I need to be mindful of the challenges the students are facing and try to adjust and be flexible as much as I can. Group work so participation, that has been a challenge. I used something called team-based learning or TBL activities when we were face-to-face. I tried to move that into breakout rooms. I tried to keep the same group each time I send them to the breakout rooms. But I noticed that if internet connectivity is not good and the time zones are not great, the participation rate was tending to fall in these breakout rooms. So I couldn't, again, realistically, I couldn't expect somebody who was taking class at 2 in the afternoon here in Alberta, it might be 3 in the morning in China. So you had that logistic problems in terms of thinking about how this breakout rooms will work. With in-person classes, when students are not in the same room doing their group work or TBL activity because of space limitations, let's say I send them to different parts of the campus or different places in the room itself, I'm not able to see each or meet with each group. But what Zoom has allowed is I can actually go into each of the rooms when I send them into a breakout room. So there has been a challenge with the breakout rooms, but also there is an opportunity. If everybody is there, it's easy to see each of them. And that's where the intimacy and learning with the peers also happens. So in the breakout rooms, I encourage my students to turn on their cameras so that they can see each other, whom they are talking with, and whom they are interacting with. Student presentations also was a challenge, especially because of the time zones. If I had a research paper and they were presenting on it, we couldn't do synchronous and get students to ask questions, but at least we managed with pre-recorded presentations that were there. Exams and assessment, I will talk about that more in a bit here. What I realized also is I seem to be spending too much time managing things rather than teaching sometimes. So keeping up with chats, watching for people raising hands, trying to keep up with all that, with all the things that happen within this within Zoom platform itself. So being an economist, I thought at least I should put some graphical illustrations here. So at least there's 1 or 2 slides with these graphs. What I'm trying to capture here is the fact that moving into the online learning environment, online teaching environment, did require quite a bit of effort making available those PowerPoint. Because if it was a whiteboard or a blackboard, I can draw those graphs and students are seeing how I change different things on the graph, and they can follow those things, follow along with me on the blackboard or the whiteboard. Whereas if I just make one graph and make that available as a PowerPoint, as a complete graph, it's hard to capture that changes that happen in the graph. So I had to spend quite a bit of time revising my graphs so that I could show each line and each movement. So this is an example from a second year microeconomics class. I usually use beer and pizza, but I changed that for this presentation to dosa and pav bhaji. Mumbai will be with that. But thinking about what is the utility maximization choice for a consumer that is faced with a budget constraint, I is income. So with $100 to spend on two goods, how do I determine the optimal choice or a utility maximization choice? Obviously, there are several steps. So again, I won't bore you. I won't bore you with the details, but these are indifference curves or utility curves, which measure satisfaction. And these lines are the budget lines. So you can see you had to transition your slides so that students can pick up and catch what is happening with each click of the mouse or each click of the button here. And then it start explaining why A is a optimal choice and not B and C. So that took quite a bit of time, transitioning those slides and making it available for the students so that they could understand, and then whatever algebraic relationships are there. So what I tried to emphasize, what I was trying to suggest here is moving into online transition, to make it worthwhile for the students to understand things. Obviously, there will be a lot of work going on. All this I could have drawn on the board, but making it into a PowerPoint slide with transition does take time. Exams and assessment also were a challenge, especially my exams require students to draw graphs and explain. And in our learning management system, eClass or Moodle, exams via eClass do not tend to work well as there is no graphing tool, and students, and that they could do it when the exam is going on. Students could answer on a sheet of paper and take an image and upload, but I wanted to avoid that. And in order to avoid the uploading process, my way or my strategy was to provide several graphs as a panel that are numbered. And then I asked students to select the appropriate graph by indicating the number and develop their written answers. So here's an example. So this is a panel that I made available to them for different as a graph. And then I asked them to answer a question here. And so this panel shows or use the labels graph 1, graph 2, etc. to explain the two scenarios given below. And I've given them a hint as you develop your answers. You could start initial equilibrium is at price and quantity as shown in graph 1. And with COVID-19 dash dash dash, and then they explain it using the panel. So because they could not draw the graph on the platform itself that they were taking the exam, this was my way of thinking. Have they understood what's happening? So the question was, COVID-19 has led to a worldwide economic shutdown or slowdown. Describe the impact of COVID-19. Describe the impact that COVID-19 has on oil demand and its impact on equilibrium price and quantity. So they had to go through these the various graphs and develop their answers. And the second
Professor
part
Manaloor,
was in addition.
A small request. We are behind schedule. Can you kindly wind up?
Okay, I have two slides more. 2 or 3.
Okay, thank you.
Will be done. Thanks. So in addition to COVID-19, Russia and Saudi Arabia, in order to increase their market share, increased oil production, describe the impact of increased production COVID-19 on oil demand. So that there are ways to think about assessment, and this was the way I thought. Again, this is another way of thinking about labeling some graph and trying to understand. The objective was have students have they grasp the material, and then can they indicate that in an answer. Making exams obviously again takes a lot of time, putting it into Excel. These are some of the challenges, obviously, especially in large classes, keeping with the chat messages. I tend to go over the chat messages after class and try to summarize things at the beginning of next day's class. As I said, it's much easier to assign students to breakout rooms. And I am going to go a little bit faster here. Class participation, broader participation by students, variety of ways, raising hands, charts, polls, keep video setting on speaker view so that I can see who is speaking. It's easier for introverts to participate as they can send chat messages. And it's easier to easier to participate. Curriculum challenges, as I said, for us, we have a little bit flexible curriculum and may not be that much in the Indian context. If curriculum is rigid, adapting to different techniques might become difficult. What do I miss most because we are not in person? Obviously, the interaction in classes. Miss the vibrancy of students and staff bringing students and staff bring when we are all physically present. Miss interacting with students and colleagues. Having face-to-face chat. I usually do tour courses. As I mentioned, I was in India, Mumbai. I was in Mumbai last January. All that has come to a stop. So I do miss some of that. Obviously, no more handshaking or anything like that. I could technically do classes from anywhere. However, because of the pandemic right now, because of travel restrictions, one can't go anywhere. So you are stuck at home and still doing this. I could pre-record lectures and not worry about class time, have virtual office times, and having those office times is important from a learning perspective. Okay, sorry I went over my time here, but if you have questions or comments, or we can take that later, I'll still be around.
Sure, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, sir, for sharing your experience. The next speaker is Dr. Narasimhan, who will speak on the topic of 3 farm bills. Dr. Narasimhan, Ph.D., Dean and Professor of Practice, School for Regulatory Studies and Supervision and School for Corporate Governance, National Institute of Security Markets, Mumbai, India. Dr. Narasimhan has around 40 years of work experience in financial and capital markets in India. As a member of Indian Institute of Company Secretaries of India, he plays an active role in the academic activities and contributed articles to their professional journals. Dr. Narasimhan is a postgraduate in Commerce, MBA Finance, and a PhD. We would now request Dr. Narasimhan to take over. Sir, you are not audible.
No, sir, you're not audible.
By the time Sir starts, I will request all the participants who have questions, they can direct them to Shreya Wazir in the personal chat. All those who have questions and queries can direct them to Shreya Wazir on personal chat.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Thank you. Are you able to see my screen as well?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Visible.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Honorable Vice Chancellor Mr. Pillai, Dr. Shivkumar, Dr. Monica, Dr. Shukla, Dr. Asha, dignitaries and speakers in the panel, and participants, good morning, everybody. I've been in post-COVID, though the 3 farm bills that we talk about and we hear about in the news on day in and day out, it is not exactly anything to do with COVID, but it has coincidentally happened along with the COVID, and therefore probably it is contextual to talk about these 3. One disclaimer, I am not an agriculturist myself, I am not a farmer myself, nor I am an economist, I am a management student. And my job was to bring the information that's contained in these legislations for the benefit of all the participants, because I don't know how many of us have actually read these particular laws and understand what government is saying and what opponents are saying about it. I have not altered, I have not put any of all the bullets I have got shown in this particular PPT are extracts from relevant material. I didn't put any of my language into that because I didn't want to give any bias, any type of bias to whatever is there. I may have to read a lot of sentences from the PowerPoint, which I hate, But in this particular presentation, I thought I should be doing it because I want to leave it to the participants to make an assessment themselves very clearly about what these formulas are saying. The presentation summary is broadly what is the origin of three laws, what are the objectives of three laws and salient features of these laws. I will try to take, I may take 3-4 minutes more than allotted 15 minutes. Kindly bear with me. It all started with appointment of Swaminathan committee. That's prior to that, there was a summit of the agricultural summit held in 2005, where Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, eminent economist himself, has said, this whole sentence I have given you, but I would like to read only the highlighted portion. We should enable direct marketing between farmers and NGOs, cooperatives and private companies. I mean, this is very profound statement. He says that government is to integrate the domestic market for all goods and services. Time has come for us to consider the entire country as a common or a single market for agricultural products. We have to systematically remove internal controls and restrictions. We should enable direct marketing between farmers and NGOs, cooperative societies and private companies. The next scene is that Swaminathan committee is appointed. It has studied and came to some conclusions. I'm trying to bring you the conclusions. It's a fairly long, about 350 pages report, but it's a very interesting report to study. But let me just give you only conclusion paragraph, which is itself very, very well articulated. What I did is, I put sentences in the concluding as bullet points, whereas this is a continuous paragraph in the report. What it says is, Indian economy has moved away from shortages and scarcities. Agriculture sector has potential for creating greater job opportunities and generation of incomes. However, the need is first to unchain the sector. Various orders, acts, orders, etc., which were enacted to regulate stocking, marketing, movement of agricultural produce, and check, and generally to safeguard the interest of farmers and the consumers, appear to have outlived their utility. APMC Act, Essential Commodities Act, and various orders enactment issued thereunder, and Prevention of Food Adulteration Act, etc., has made the compliance of these laws difficult and has led to development of fragmented markets. The taxes at state and local level are on a cascading basis. And finally, the transport of goods across district state boundaries is slow and time consuming. The goods carriers should be detained at border posts for any number of reasons for any length of time. The junior officials and other manning these checkposts are not too reluctant to accept bribes. Very subtly put, very profoundly put. This is the background in which the three formulas were created in our country. What are the three formulas we're talking about? We're talking about three formulas. First one is called as Farmers Empowerment Act. Next one is called as Farmers Produce and Commerce Promotion Facilitation Act. And third is Amendment to Essential Commodities Act. Let us see the objective of the first act, Farmers Empowerment Act. It is exactly what is the objects clause of the particular legislation. Thankfully, each of the legislation does not run beyond 8-7 pages. It's very easy to read and it's completely simple English. It's not any complicated legal language. Therefore, I encourage everybody to read these provisions to be able to make an assessment of what is the crisis we are actually seeing at the Delhi borders. Enacted to provide for a national framework on farming agreements and that protects and empowers farmers to engage with agribusiness firms, processors, wholesalers, exporters or large retailers for farm services and sale of future farming produce at a mutually agreed and remunerative price framework in a fair and transparent manner and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. That is, it's actually empowers farmers to enter into contract farming for different types of users, including foreign consumers. That's what exactly it means as far as this particular provisions are concerned. I have separate slides on salient features. When we see the salient features, we'll understand what these objectives are translated to. Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act. This is a very important point. That is, whereas agriculture by itself is a state subject, post-harvest agricultural produce marketing is a concurrent list. Please understand this situation. Agriculture is a state subject, whereas farmers produce marketing is a concurrent subject. Therefore, central government has taken the initiative of making a law about it. I have underlined certain parts of this particular objects class for ease of understanding and emphasis. What it says is the creation of an ecosystem where the farmers and traders enjoy the freedom of choice relating to sale and purchase of farmers' produce, which facilitates remunerative prices through competitive alternative trading channels. And the last sentence says, to provide facilitative framework for electronic trading and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Why should the farmers be deprived of electronic trading? They must be able to trade through the electronic marketplaces. So therefore, this particular legislation gives an option. Also, farmers have been given the choice of selling either in the APMC market or outside of APMC market, so that they have choices. They can fix the price for their commodities. That's what the second law is. The third law, the amendment to the Essential Commodities Act, I have extracted section 1A, which is like an objective of the particular act. Because it's Amendment Act, there's no specific objective stated in the legislation. Just read this. What it says is that central government may be regulating only under extraordinary circumstances. That is, supply of such foodstuffs, including cereals, pulses, potato, onions, edible oil seeds, etc. As the central government may, by notification, specify may be regulated only under extraordinary circumstances, which may include war, famine, extraordinary prices, etc. It very clearly says that Government of India will not regulate stocking of the commodities listed here unless it's extraordinary situation, and extraordinary situations are broadly defined in terms of war, famine, extraordinary price rise. And extraordinary prices also been defined. I will tell you when I'm showing you the salient features. This is the broad three framework or objectives of the three laws we are talking about. I will now turn to salient features of each of the act. First act is Farmers Empowerment Act. Farmer is free to enter an agreement with a sponsor to do what? He can enter into an agreement with a sponsor. That is, a sponsor will ask the farmer to do certain production activity. In that context, he can enter the agreement with a sponsor, and that agreement should contain this. Very clearly stated in this. For supply such produce, including time of supply, quality, grade and standards, prices, etc. Everything about supply of goods has been defined. Minimum period for the farming agreement shall be for one crop, season or production cycle of livestock, as the case may be, and maximum period shall be 5 years. That is, even the contract farming contracts cannot be extending beyond 5 years or one life cycle. In case it's a production cycle for an animal or a animal husbandry, whether it's a piggery, whether it is a dairy, whether it is pisciculture, whatever. In all these cases, at least one life cycle should be completed for livestock, and that's what exactly is provided. Thirdly, to facilitate farmers into entering into a written farming agreement, the central government may issue necessary guidelines along with model farming agreement. The doubt whether the farmer will be exploited is fairly attended to by saying that government will draft a model agreement which should be the basis on which the agreements may be entered into, and specify mutually acceptable quality, grade and standards of farming produce, keeping in view agro practices, climatic conditions, etc. Grades may be predefined by government agencies. What is a grade will be predefined by government agencies in terms of, say, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, etc. And depending upon the specific area, different grades of produce could be produced. Let's understand that each grade has its own utility. There could be some grade of the crop which can be used as animal feed, whereas grade 1 could be used for human consumption, or grade 6 could be used for fermenting and production of beer and alcohol, or maybe any other type of medicinal requirements, so on and so forth. Therefore, every grade has a use, and therefore
depending upon the agricultural practices and climatic conditions, different grades of the same product can be produced, and all of that can be there. It's not necessarily the only best quality should be produced everywhere. Next one is that parties may require the condition that mutually acceptable quality grade standards shall be monitored and certified during the process of cultivation or rearing or at time of delivery by third-party qualified assays to ensure impartiality and fairness. This is a very important point. That is, between the two, farmer and the sponsor, it's quite possible that the weaker one get exploited because of the strength of the other one, and therefore a third-party assayer will be playing a role in terms of saying that either it is satisfying a particular role or not. And these assayers could be qualified assayers, maybe there could be government departments and so on and so forth, but the third party intervention is there to determine the quality, because when you sow the seed, it's quite possible that you have sown the best quality of the seed, but output may not necessarily be of the quality of a seed sown, and therefore third party assaying may be required. The assayers will become an important professional career option for people who are looking for agricultural sector to be their area where they want to work. Price to be paid for the purchase by farming produce may be determined and mentioned in the agreement. If price is agreed to be variable, it's again important provision. It's quite possible that the price need not necessarily be fixed. It could be variable also. If it is variable, the fixed price should be determined in the agreement, and variation principle should be what you call it, the formula for determining the variability that should be prescribed in the act itself, agreement itself. Again, a very important provision, a very useful option. If sponsor is responsible to take delivery at farm gate, sponsor shall take delivery within agreed timeline. If farmer is responsible, sponsor should arrange to accept the time delivery. I don't know how many of you know, for example, a sugar cane is cut. Once sugar cane is cut, unless it is weighed immediately, the weight of sugarcane will come down because of the humidity or water content will get dried up. So it's general trick that any sugar field nowadays does is that they ask the sugarcane to be brought and they make the people to stand in queue at least 24-48 hours so that the weight of the sugarcane comes down and farmer is shortchanged. In order to prevent such situations, it says that there should be a timeline defined in the agreement itself in terms of how much time will it take to accept the delivery, and in case the farmer has to give it, if the sponsor has to accept at his gate, sponsor should make arrangement to see that it's received in so and so time. All this is predefined in the act itself. Agreed price shall be paid at the time of accepting delivery or payment, and payment shall be made using the method prescribed. Again, very important point. Price should be given at the time of delivery versus payment, and payment has to be done through the mode prescribed by the government. That is, there are so many payment structures today, and the payment structures defined by the government should be specifically used for the purpose of payment, so that there's nothing like there's a proof for payment, etc., very clearly stated. Other features, I need to go a bit faster. Agreements are made in this are exempt from any applicable state act. This is where actually the problem comes. That's why people are shouting. Stock limits, if any, prescribed in the Residential Commodities Act are not applicable to the produce under this act. This is very important point. For example, a contract farmer, a sponsor is asking somebody to farm about 200-500 hectares of land for production of, say, sugar cane, a medicinal plant, or a maize, etc. The output could be so high that the stock that comes into the hands of sponsor may be exceeding the essential commodities limits. How should it be treated? Since a sponsor is obliged to take delivery, this kind of act should not be applicable. Very visionary and thoughtful provision in the act. Agreement shall not have any clause for transfer or lease of farm ownership or empower sponsor to erect any structures on the farmland. Very important point. That is, the sponsor should not have any kind of rights whatsoever on the farmland, and he cannot have any structures to be. That is, the sponsor cannot say, I will have a warehouse constructed on your farmland. Nothing doing. Sponsor will not have any kind of a right on the land at all. Agreement shall contain conciliation for dispute resolution. If conciliation is not effective, district magistrate may appoint conciliation board to resolve dispute. Again, an important point. In case of dispute, how to resolve it is also a part of agreement. That's what exactly the act says. And agreement may be registered with the state prescribed registration authority. This is the area of concern because registration authorities, wherever they are, we know how they behave. And therefore, this is only area of concern as far as I'm concerned. I'll turn to the next act. Farmers Produce and Produce Trade and Commerce Act It's a wonderful act. People who are enthusiastic entrepreneurs amongst the participants can look at this act for setting up agricultural trade electronic facility. I'll tell you why. You can, as you will see the provisions, you'll understand. Any farmer or trader or electronic trading and transaction platform shall have the freedom to carry on interstate, intrastate trade and commerce in the farmers' produce in the trade area. Very important provision. This is a starting provision itself. If necessary, central government may prescribe a system for electronic registration of a trader, modalities of trade transaction, etc. To start with, there's no registration requirement. If required, only central government will say, if pioneers are there, if they grab the opportunity, there's no registration, they can straightaway set up the electronic trading platform. 3. Trader who transacts with farmers shall make payment for the traded schedules on the same day or within the maximum 3 working days, if procedurally so required, subject to the condition of receipt of delivery. This is a very important provision. In the Act says that delivery versus payment is assured, but in case of any exigencies because of the product that we have got, let us suppose for a while somebody brings in 100 tons of chili. You know how much of what is 100 tons of chilies? 100 tons of chilies may mean about 1,000 lorries. 1,000 lorries of chilies have to be weighed. It takes so much time. So therefore, whenever you are talking about delivery, if delivery versus payment is assured, therefore money may not be able to be given you immediately. It should be given only after the completing the process required for weighing, etc. That's what the provision says. Any person other than individual, individuals cannot set up, but any institution can set up, a trust can set up, a cooperative body can set up, a company can set up, a partnership can set up. They should have a PAN or any formal having a PAN, any entity, any person having a PAN or a farmer producing FPO, farmer producer organization or agricultural city may be able to establish a trading platform. No, this is a very important provision. No market fee or cess or levy by whatever name called under the State APMC Act or any other state law shall be levied on any farmer or trader or electronic trading or trade and commerce. This is very important. Unless APMC Act, there is a lot of problems where there are several types of cess and fees were being collected. All that cannot be collected is what very clearly this provision is saying. And central government may through central government organization develop a price information and market intelligence system for farmers, produce and framework for dissemination of information relating thereto. It's very important that let us assume for a while I'm a farmer of what you call producing turmeric. I should know what is the price of turmeric in Nizamabad of Andhra Pradesh, Erode of Tamil Nadu, and some other place in Karnataka. So if I'm getting a better price in Karnataka market, I may want to sell in Karnataka market, move my goods from Hyderabad, Nizamabad to Karnataka to be able to get the kind of price I want to get. And therefore, these opportunities are given for the farmers by giving a price information, just like what we see in the stock market prices. In stock market, televisions and stock exchanges keep on throwing the prices. So people who know see the price, they will take a decision to buy, sell, or whatever they want to do. And finally, dispute resolution is by conciliation. That's also conciliation award is binding on both part. It's also part of the Act. Now I turn towards the last section provision, that is Essential Commodities Amendment Act. What it says is that central government may by notification regulate only under extraordinary circumstances defined. What is exactly circumstances defined? And any action imposing stock limit shall be based on price rise and an order for related stock limit or any produce may be issued under this Act only if there is 100% increase in the retail price of the horticultural produce or 50% increase in the retail price of non-perishable agricultural foodstuffs. When you are saying non-perishable foodstuffs, they are talking about pulses. In the case of 100% increase in the retail price of horticultural produce, those are circumstances in which central government may be able to issue this stock limit kind of a rule. These are the various provisions. I have this PPT can be shared. I request Institute to share the PPT. People can read it. Then you can understand what exactly these 3C laws are saying, whether there's a merit in the protest going on or not. Is there a merit in what government is saying? You can appreciate yourself. Thanks for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for a valuable analysis and giving us better comprehension on the farm bills. We have with us the next speaker, Mr. Viral Trivedi, who would speak on Indian equity markets. Mr. Viral Trivedi, CA, founding managing partner, Life Investment Advisory, Mumbai, India. He has over 18 years of work experience in financial services and capital markets. Mr. Viral strongly believes to stay on the learning curve and remains adhered to his core values. At Life Investment Advisory, he manages equity, investments, and portfolio of clients. In addition to equities, the firm also advises clients on investment in various other asset classes such as mutual funds, estate, etc. Life Group also plays an active role in raising funds by way of debt and equity for mature businesses as well as for startups. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, everyone. I really thank the Vice Chancellors and all the professors and other distinguished speakers and academics who are present here. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on introduction and all that stuff because we have pretty limited time, and within 10-15 minutes, if I can throw up light on what's happening in the equity market and what equity markets are heading forward, 10 minutes might be pretty less, but maybe, yeah, in 10 minutes time, a lot of things can happen in the stock market, right? So let's start with, I'll start with my presentation. So we already had a wonderful presentation from Dr. Sachchidanand. He explained about the economy and all, right? And obviously economy takes, we give a decent idea in terms of how the economy was in last few years and where we are headed. And obviously equity market in a way gives a signal. So the way equity market have bounced back, or it's almost at an all-time high right now. So does that mean that the economy is shielded? Maybe of course the time will tell, because equity markets typically always move ahead of expectations, right? So, but before we talk on what are the equity markets right now, or why it's at all-time high, let us just go a little bit in history, because it definitely makes sense, as in terms of if you're talking about the year 2018-19, definitely equity markets had a lot of, you can say, skepticism, because overall,
Dr. Narasimhan sir, please stop sharing so that Viral sir can have their screen.
Yeah.
Hello. Dr. Narasimhan sir, please stop sharing your screen. Yeah.
Yeah. So is my slide visible, everyone?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes.
So as I said, the Indian equity, you can say the economy was in a lot of sort of, you can say, degrowth or sort of stagnation coming into play, because if you look at all the basic parameters or the macro data that was prevailing, all was more or less going either on a stagnation or on the downside way, right? Because there had been a lot of reforms, or you can say the disruption happened in terms of demonetization, then GST and all those things. So as and all this different announcement came, and people hope that yes, now economy will bounce back, the corporate capex cycle will revive, the growth will coming into play. But for whatever reason, the corporate earning never catch up to the expectation of the investors. So if you see in 2018-19 years, equity market were more or less in a pretty you can see a range bound trade. Obviously, government took certain steps. They announced various stimulus packages. Government, in fact, reduced the corporate tax rate to about 25%, right? So all these things, in a way, tried to give a sort of an impetus to the investing community. But but looking at the macro numbers, things were not at all great. Typically, as I said, the moreover macroeconomic numbers were on the showing a downward direction. Private capex cycle was absolutely absent, because, as I said, with demonetization, GST, so this kind of reform happened. The corporate were more or less on the wait and watch sort of a criteria. Then obviously the overall demand growth was lacking somewhere, right? I mean, obviously 2019 we saw great, you can say, the degrowth that happened in the auto sector, right? So from corporate side, they all were waiting, let things settle down, let GST and everything streamline, because there have been a lot of change happen in the rates and various definitions of various goods and services. So everyone was on a wait and watch sort of a criteria, and so private capex was lacking. And obviously one of the reasons is the banking, right? Because banking is being under a lot of hangover as far as the NPA is concerned, then you have this NBFC crisis, the DHFL, the ILNFS. Obviously, you have to bail out Yes Bank, where SBI again has to, pump in with other private banks and also. So all this thing came together, and in a way, equity market was not going anywhere. And add to that, as we entered the 2020, the slowdown was met with a lockdown. Now, obviously, I'm not going to talk too much on the pandemic. I think enough things has been said since the morning. But yes, it was in a way a first once in a lifetime sort of experience, whether you're a corporate, you're a government, you're a individual, or whatever you are. So suddenly all the economic activity came to a standstill. Oil prices, for whatever reason, the future prices went into negative territory. Job cut, pay cuts, all these kinds of things that become sort of a norm, or people were anticipating that going the way things are, with the corporates shutting down their manufacturing units, their offices and all, how many, forget about the new job creation, but the current job cycle may also come to a halt, right? So pandemic in a way led to a pretty unprecedented scenario. And obviously, in this unprecedented scenario, which started in the end of, say, second or third week of March, as individual also, we had no idea. I mean, we were all lighting diyas outside our flats, so maybe we were banging our utensils outside our windows, right? And we had no clue what we are doing, but yeah, we were doing that. But in all this sort of atmosphere, the one thing was clear, that the equity market are going to take a big hit, because if all the economic activities are going to come to a halt, the corporate earnings are going to take a big hit. We had no idea when the lockdown will be over, when the overall economic activity will come back to the normal, right? How the profit and loss of the balance sheets of various companies and all will be looking like, right? So there were consensus that yes, equity markets are going to take a beating, and obviously that is what happened. In March 2020, if you look at this particular chart, the big outflow happened, whereby basically almost close to 65 crore of equity money that has been taken away in the one month itself. But surprise, surprise, what happened immediately after that is something that no one has anticipated or predicted. It's absolutely crazy movement, because the smart money came in. Now, why the smart money start coming in? Because as I said, as people on the street, or most of the people feel to realize, but there's a strong consensus was happening, building in the financial market, that in this kind of scenario where all the countries are going for a lockdown, everyone wants to stop the economic activity, no social interaction, everyone is sitting at the home or wherever they are. So one thing that all the government and central bank needs to do is that nothing but to printing as much money as possible to revive the economy, or bring back the confidence to the streets. So that is what happens. So if you look at how the things shaped up, financial markets anticipated that yes, eventually the government and the central bank has to print as much money as possible to revive the economy, or to bring it back on the growth track as soon as possible. So obviously, all the countries, the economy have to announce the stimulus package. And once we have this kind of stimulus package being announced, the cheap liquidity is available. Obviously, the moment money is available cheap, it will always chase the riskier asset class. And equity being the riskier asset class, there is no surprise that all the money that are being printed in last few months is all being getting into the equity. And that is one of the reasons why not only India, but globally, all the equity markets rallied. So as we've been talking about all the negative factors that were prevailing, all the equity market in the world rebounded pretty quickly from March 2020 low. And as much as I said that India witnessed about a 60 or 65,000 crore sell-off in the month of March, in the month of November itself, it got more than 70,000 crore, right? And it was one of the highest in the last 13 years. So as an Indian, or as a onlookers, we kept on discussing about the downside, or the kind of risk that the pandemic has produced. The equity market moved on its own, anticipating this kind of scenario, right? And add to that the recent budget announcement, where the finance ministry finally bite the bullet and gave away with the fiscal deficit fixation. So as I think in the earlier presentation, Dr. Sachchidanand Shukla said that yes, 9.5% fiscal deficit is something that's obviously is going to take a lot of toll in terms of how you're going to repay that. But obviously at some point in time, government has to take this call, because you cannot keep on harping on a low fiscal deficit at the cost of growth, right? And in the pandemic has given in a way, a perfect opportunity for the government to actually bite the bullet. Okay, let us just spend as much money as possible on the infrastructure, on the healthcare, on whatever the way the government can. It's not only going to pump in the money, but it's also going to create a lot of growth also, and that's obviously going to lead to a lot of job opportunities, and that will again recycle the entire value chain as far as the growth is concerned. So a strong fiscal and policy support for the infrastructure and healthcare investments. Good part is no further tinkering with the tax rates anywhere, which is in a way is again a pretty good signal that yes, now in a way tax is something that the government is not going to keep on levying at different levels and different forms. With the same sort of tax revenue or the tax rates, government is now going to put more focus on the monetization of their assets, maybe banks or other government PSUs which are in different fields, maybe oil and gas or mining metals or whatever it is. So it's a good in a way that government is now going to not tinker with the tax rate, but going to monetize their assets to create that kind of buffer, the inflows in terms of revenue. And obviously 9.5% fiscal deficit is going to create some pain, but eventually, if with this kind of expenditure, if government can bring back the growth of maybe 6, 7, 8% over next few years, then obviously India will be in much better shape as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned. Now, so basically, with a very strong liquidity that is already in abundance across the globe, right? And add to that this kind of budget announcement that the government has made, the market is now anticipating that now at least in a very verifiable, or you can say foreseeable future, you can see a very good corporate earning growth. Right now, when we say corporate earning growth, again, if you go back to history from 2009 to 2019, in a decade, the Nifty 50, the top 50 companies, the corporate earning growth was absolutely lackluster at 7%, right? So, which is no way can justify the kind of premium valuation you can give to Indian markets, right? So, in a way, corporates have failed to deliver the kind of earning growth over past few years. But with this kind of policy or the budget in place, and obviously the kind of you can say the sharp revive in some of the green shoots, so you can say the growth we have seen in last few months post lockdown was gradually getting over. Things are looking better, and obviously what has helped in a way hindsight, you can say that what the pandemic has done, that it has given all these corporates a lot of opportunity to cut down their cost, rationalize this cost structure, right? And also it helps them to reduce their balance sheet leverage. So in a way, the company would be much better shape going forward with a lesser debt on their balance sheet, with a reduced cost structure. And if a little bit of top line growth happens of say 4-5%, it can really help a meaningful recovery in the earning. Now, just to take a fantastic example, if you look at the companies like say Infosys, Wipro, or TCS, now these are basically top 3 IT companies in India. Now, if you look at the data of 2019 September, July to September quarter, they were spending close to about 1860, or you can say 1900 crore on the traveling expenses, right? Combine all 3 companies for the quarter of July to September 2019. They were spending almost 1900 crore of traveling expenses. Come to July to September 2020, the traveling expense combined of all these companies is about 520 crores now, a drastic fall. And most interesting part is the top line of all these 3 companies has grown anywhere between 4 to 6%, despite the travel restrictions and everything, despite there being a very large exposure to foreign companies, foreign countries as far as their business is concerned. So this definitely brings a lot of focus on the kind of cost restructuring this company have done. Now, obviously, with this kind of a more than a half cut in their traveling expenses, if this company can still grow their revenue by 4-5%, I'm sure it's going to create a lot of restructuring, or you can say rationalization of cost across all the companies, right? So I think this might be, in hindsight, this pandemic might give all these companies a very rational idea in terms of how to and where to control their costs, thereby improve their earnings. Obviously, the announcement of various PLI schemes and obviously government's strong focus on the capex part is going to give a lot of momentum to the manufacturing space, because eventually your service can grow at any number, your agriculture is growing, but you need manufacturing space to grow, because that is what is actually going to have a spiral effect in terms of higher growth of your job opportunities, and then it can trickle down to your GDP level, right? Obviously, one of the interesting aspects of this budget is the banking reform. So now finally government has again said clearly that enough of reducing our stake from say 70% to 50%, but now we want to get away with doing of this banking business. How far the government would be successful in this particular uh, uh, idea of selling off at least two banks, obviously time will tell. But again, if you see post budget, the moment this announcement was made, the entire stock market rally was led by the banking sector, and that too by a public bank sectors likes of your SBI, the Bank of Baroda, the PNB, the Canara Bank, and all that. So in a way, it's a very, very good thing that government is finally deciding to get away with the banking business and obviously putting up a bad bank. Now, obviously, bad bank not necessarily it's going to change the entire NPS scenario for India, but again, it's a step in the right direction with more developed banking system with the ICB, your insolvency bankruptcy code, IBC also in place now. A lot of interest are there in terms of alternate investment funds into India who might be looking at some of the distressed assets. So now maybe putting up a bad bank whereby you are transferring all the weight of NPA from current banking system to a ARC and AMC might make a lot of sense. At least the banks then can get into the taking a business calls, because now right now what was happening till now that banks were not at all ready to lend funds, right? Because they are more or less worried about their earlier hangover in terms of how to clean their books rather than increasing their business. So with bad bank coming into play, it definitely open a window of opportunity for banks to again start focusing on their business, growing the business. Credit growth will be a crucial factor. And obviously, RBI has done a fantastic job. We have to give full marks to the RBI the way they have been able to steer their monetary policy in last 1.5 years. I mean, credit has to go there where it deserves. And again, in the last week also in monetary policy, RBI has absolutely categorically said that yes, they are going to continue with the accommodative stance. Obviously, government has taken a call in terms of getting the fiscal deficit to 9.5%, but here we are going to fund the liquidity as much as possible to support the entire financial system. So if you look at the yesterday data, in fact, the way after the announcement of a budget where the 9.5% fiscal deficit and the 12 lakh crore of government borrowing was announced, the yield definitely spiked upwards, right? Immediately the next couple of days. But yesterday, with the kind of RBI intervention happened, your GSEC yield on 10-year bonds are back to about 6%, maybe a little bit, below 6% level. So again, it shows that there's enough confidence and liquidity available in the Indian banking system. So now, what to expect as far as the markets are concerned? So obviously, as I said, the cheap liquidity is basically leads the way. Always, whenever there's money available, definitely it goes to the risky asset class, and in a way, it gets into the asset where they can expect a higher return. So obviously, the equity rally initially was fooled by the liquidity which was available, and it was obviously much narrowed in terms of the large cap stocks that were getting a lot of mention, or you can say a lot of growth, or the valuation of large cap companies was getting much expensive. But now, as with budget coming in, a lot of revival signs that the economy is giving, gradually we are seeing that the interest towards the mid cap and the small cap companies also now getting translated into valuations were attractive. Obviously, when the March 2020 the market crashed, valuations were very attractive. Obviously, again, from looking back from the period of 2018-19, when the equity market was not going anywhere, typically most of the mid cap and small cap stocks corrected anywhere between 40 to 70%, right? So even today, if we see, there's a lot of value available in the mid cap and small cap space. Maybe more or less value might be captured in most of the large cap companies, but still there are decent companies, decent place available to invest your money. So obviously, currently, if you look at the Nifty at almost 15,200 level today, the 22 times price earning multiple for FY22 earning, no one can say that Indian markets are cheap. Obviously, it's a very expensive market in a way. But as I said, if the growth comes in with the kind of bold announcement that the government has taken in the budget, hopefully the key catalyst for the Indian market would be the fundamentals in terms of whether the corporate earnings are able to do the catch up. So I think going forward, everyone will be keenly watching the kind of corporate earnings that will be coming out in the next 2-3 quarters, and based on that, obviously the market will move, right? But yes, at the same time, one has to keep your eyes and ears pretty wide and open, right? If you look at some of the events that are happening globally, there are some, you can say, the bubble signs are available, the way some of the cryptocurrencies movements are happening, right? Some of the trades that are happening in US, whereby some of the stocks have been unnecessarily getting, the highlight because of certain social media sites hyped up that stock, and some hedge fund has to, unwind the short position and all. So this is nothing but in a way is happening because a lot of money is available, right? Whereby you are taking this speculative bets or you are taking this risky bet. So yes, liquidity is currently creating a little bit of bubble, not necessarily it's something that need to burst immediately, but yes, one has to keep their, eyes and everything open to know that yes, where the bubbles are creating. Maybe the gold price also has surged in last 4-5 months to certain extent. So liquidity has definitely a lot of implication as far as creating this kind of bubbles, but not necessarily that can be burst immediately. So as I said, there are certainly there are many wonderful ideas available in India, and looking at the way things are and the kind of interest all the foreign investors again putting in India, because all this time everyone was pretty much negative once we hear the word like fiscal deficit, and that too of 9.5%. It definitely triggers a lot of negative reaction, right? But again, from a European perspective or maybe US perspective, they are giving names like stimulus package or quantitative easing, right? But I was actually hoping that our government comes up with some fancy idea or fancy name for fiscal deficit, because that theme can again add more value to the equity market, right? Because equity always works on certain themes or some certain, fancy ideas. So as far as US or European countries are there, they are using the terms like quantitative easing or, stimulus packages, but eventually this is nothing but deficit financing, isn't it? So I don't see any reason why Indian government also should not take the bold step which they already taken in taking, the fiscal deficit. But yeah, it has certain, you can say, the negative reaction over the longer term time frame if the growth doesn't come. But eventually, right now, I think it's a pretty decent way decision to take right now. So just to summarize my sense in terms of what's happening or what is going to happen to equity market. So potential upside risk, as I said, is your strong economic recovery and your corporate earnings. Government being able to monetize their assets, if they can able to do that in a pretty stipulated time frame, it will be, it will give a lot of confidence to the foreign investors also. More importantly, the packages, the stimulus packages that the government is announcing actually goes to the SME and MSME space, right? Because today the company like Reliance or TCS or Infosys or Lever, they don't face problem when they want to raise funds, right? Because for them, they can still get rates at a they funds at a pretty cheap rate. But the problem actually lies in the low strata in terms of corporate, the small enterprise and MSMEs, right? Where actually they are the one who are actually going through a lot of credit squeeze, or you can say the liquidity squeeze right now, because banks are pretty slow in giving loans to the companies whose balance sheets are not strong enough. So typically, right now, as many people say that there's nothing happening in the economy, but the stock market is just going up, crazy. But the reason is that if you look at the Nifty or the Sensex, which essentially makes a 50 or 30 companies pool, all those 30 or 50 companies doesn't actually have much problem on their balance sheet of profit and loss, right? Because lockdown obviously might have impacted all the companies, but the Reliance or the Bajaj or the Tata Group, they didn't find too much of a problem as far as their profit and loss and balance sheets are concerned. Their earning more or less remained the same. So obviously, they didn't have any negative impact on the earnings. So obviously, market is valuing them according to that. But the problem actually persists or is with the your small companies in the MSME space, whereby that is where the problem lies. So I think with banking sector getting a lot of impetus from the government and getting, infusion of a lot of capital as well as the divestment of some of the banks to the private sector. I think once the banking sector gets cleaned up with this NBFC crisis more or less being now, seems to be a settled affair as of now. So if that is happening, the credit lines are open for the SMEs and MSME space going forward actively, then I'm sure things will be much better in, in near a couple of years time. So I think these are the potential upside risks for the market. And obviously, in terms of downside risk, the green shoot or the current, upswing economy again hit some roadblock or the bump somewhere. We don't know. Corporate again fails to reverse the capex cycle, because now is the time the company needs to put up their, pull up their socks and start putting their money into putting up a lot of new facilities. So hopefully they will do that. Inflation and deficit, obviously the fiscal deficit will definitely bring these two points on the focus again. So how government and the RBI in tandem works to contain the inflation, the deficit risk and everything. Obviously that it will be a critical, you can say, parameter or critical points one has to always look for. Squeeze in global liquidity. I don't know if at all this is possible, because the way all the US is typically printing the dollars, who and how is going stop this particular printing game is anyone's guess. Yeah, if that happens abruptly, obviously then everyone will be shocked. At least a short-term shock will happen. And obviously government always been aggressive as far as their divestment plans and everything is concerned, right? So if they've been able to meet those guidelines, then obviously it might have again deter the confidence of the investors, right? So this is a pretty small presentation I thought I'll share with you as far as my thought process on the equity market. So thank you so much for your patient hearing, everyone. So I hope it's a fruitful session. Any questions, I would be more than happy to answer anyone.
Thank you so much for the interesting session, sir. And sir, could you please stop sharing?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Now with us, we have our next speaker, Shri Sandip Ghose, who would speak on the theme Teaching and Learning Challenges in Higher Education, Indian Context. Mr. Sandip Ghose is former director, National Institute of Securities Market, Mumbai, India. Mr. Ghose was the head of Human Resource and Reserve Bank of India. Mr. Sandip Ghose holds a master's degree in history and is an alumnus of Anderson School of Management, UCLA, and Columbia Business School, amongst others. Mr. Ghose was awarded honorary doctoral degree by the EIILM University, Sikkim, for his contribution to the cause of HR. It is an honor to have you, sir. Over to you.
So thank you, Radhika. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, so I think we have overshot the time, and it would be very unfair that we don't have questions after this session. So one of the problems with Zoom communication on conferences that we always have a very good panel of speakers, but we don't have too much participation from the people for whom the conference is being organized. And that is the challenge which I think Gaurav and Radhika, you are supposed to be able to take care in the future. I don't have a presentation. Let me make some big points. I was saying to the faculty while we were sitting in the guest room that we have been talking last 10 years in the business school about the VUCA world. And we didn't know that we will face the reality of it with the onset of COVID-19. So this is exactly the VUCA world, which we have been talking about in some form or the other in management conferences. The biggest challenge of this lockdown, whatever it is, the economy is down, markets are up, but the biggest challenge is navigating between the baby boomers, the X, Y, and the Z generation. That has been the biggest challenge. Having been associated with a lot of academic institutions across the globe, I'm still on the advisory boards of a number of international business schools. The biggest challenge is not on the delivery of curriculum or assessment, because I don't feel a lot of things have changed in that area. People have just reproduced whatever they were teaching and are communicating it. At least that was so in the first 6 months. It is now only that the war rooms in different universities and business schools have got together and are trying their level best to find engagements for the students through this medium. Because you see, online teaching is one thing and engaging the student with is another thing. And if we are limiting ourselves to higher education institutions, in India itself, we have 1,000 universities, 50,000 higher education colleges, and close to 3.5 crore people engaging in higher education, which may be the population of number of countries across the globe. there are 20 lakh teachers only associated with higher education. So the disruption which the COVID-19 has brought about with this sudden lockdown, the first reaction was manage the now. So how to complete the semester, how to get enrollment on board, how to ensure that placement takes place, how to ensure that there is cash flow across the sector so that we don't run into a crunch. So those were much more important, and somehow or the other people from virtually 13% online education prior to COVID-19, we were striking a rate of around 98, 99% in higher education institution. But at what cost? We only talked about disparity in economy, disparity in wealth, but the disparity in digital management itself is huge. There is only 8% of households in India who have both internet and laptops. Only 8%. And this goes down as low as 3 to 4% in states like Bihar and Orissa. Kerala, Delhi, they are much higher up in the graph. But this digital divide, the divide between genders in the same house, the boy has the facility of using the computer, but the girl doesn't have. So one of the solutions which this challenge has brought about, because you see, higher education is not only for looking for jobs. Higher education is a full-fledged experience. Higher education provides the comfort of getting educated for life. When we say we are building the future of the country, we means we are building the future of the young students who are going to run the country in the future. So universities and higher education institutions are the institutions which build the future for the country. And it is very surprising that at least in the Indian context, the government has not been very supportive. In fact, the budget sees a reduction in the education budget and the digital budget rather than an increase in these two sectors. So with my personal experience, I've seen the challenges at different levels, mainly of the survival of the institutions. See, Somaiya has an advantage. It's a private public university. It is for the social good. So they think much broader than what only private universities or only private institutions think. But the challenges are humongous. So I would only, for record's sake, I know that we are late in the day, only for record's sake, because both Professor Shivakumar and Professor Asa Prasunna worked quite a lot in putting this conference into place, and I have been personally engaged with it in a different way. So I know that what is the importance of a publication post this, and each and every speaker's details do help. So from that point of view, I'm only saying that as on date, none of us, we know a lot of challenges, we know a lot of indicators which have happened in the higher education sector, but we do not know how these would pan out in the short, medium, long term. Which challenges will be more critical in the short, medium, long term? We have no idea about that. For many higher education institutions, it has become much easier to access faculty across the globe, but it is becoming much difficult to manage the cash crunch because the enrollments have come down, and to a great extent, the support teams of these universities are feeling a threat that one of the biggest fallout of the COVID-19 for private institutions, especially higher education institutions, would be that they may not be able to retain their jobs in these institutions, because today, you heard Professor Varghese talking about synchronous and asynchronous teaching. There is a huge threat to the faculty itself, that if asynchronous teaching becomes part and parcel of university teaching, then you may or may not require faculty because every video is loaded, every presentation is loaded, and it can be run by a group of facilitators at any point of time. So all these are also big challenges and higher education was never free from challenges. Even prior to COVID, the cash crunch was always there. The uncertainty of numbers was always there, at least not in the case of India, but in India too. For example, this is the first year then where around 80,000 engineering seats are lying vacant, because people have not been able to take a decision how to migrate from +2 to graduation, or how to migrate from graduation to the fall in MTech education is much deeper than fall in BTech education, because people have not been able to assess how to migrate from BTech to MTech. It is also a fact, which Professor Varghese also mentioned, that number of institutions have come up and have benefited extensively from the COVID-19 situation. And their revenue streams have grown leaps and bounds. It is but natural that they must be providing service also. Without service, revenue stream mounting, but I do not know whether these are sustainable. I am also at today's point of time, I do not know whether in 6 months' time, we will be getting back to business as usual. And if we get back to business as usual, I can say with full certainty that it would be a hybrid model, because the universities and centers of higher education have invested so much on learning management system in this short time that they would not like to lose this opportunity of continuing to have global access through these mediums only for a student experience. It is a different thing. Since I've run institutions, it's a different thing. I'm not very sure, and that is where Gaurav and Radhika, because you are the only students whom I can look at currently, is how much of these facilities you use even otherwise. When I was director of NISM, we had a fantastic library, but the libraries, the books would be begging the students' visit or somebody to flip open the book. So these are challenges, and we have no roadmap, because such a pandemic, even the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, the World Wars, was not so much where the challenges are concerned. This is a challenge of a different nature, that for a country of India's size and diversity, we suddenly announce a lockdown in mid-May and the whole country comes to a standstill. And then for n number of hours, you keep on watching the television to see how the migrants in the 21st century are walking 200 to 300 kilometers just to go to their home. So this has been totally unprecedented. And I think the bigger challenge is what most of the consultants, at least the consultants groups, are saying, respond, recover, and thrive. And I think that is, we have just responded. I'm not sure we have recovered, but we have to thrive. And at this juncture, I think the biggest challenge is that of the educator, to engage with the students and create instruments of engagement. And one of the instruments of engagement which I can recommend is, and which the advisory boards and the educators themselves can play, is mentoring. Mentoring for tempering expectations, building resilience, working on adaptability and flexibility, working on continuous learning. This mentoring part has become very, very important, because the long-term damage on the minds of the young students at this juncture is very difficult to analyze. So I know that we have overshot time, we are touching 12 o'clock, but the sessions were very good. I only feel bad that we would not have students to ask questions. And if you all feel to connect at any point of time through Dr. Shiv Kumar or Dr. Asha, you're most welcome to connect to us and send us the question, which we would willingly want to reply online. Thank you very much for having me.
We do have some questions, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sandip Ghose. I take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, Dr. Shukla, Dr. Varghese Manaloor, Professor V.R. Narasimhan, Mr. Viral Trivedi, and Professor Sandip Ghose. Given the time overshoot, I think we can take one question per panelist. Yeah.
Definitely, sir.
Are we ready with the questions?
Yes, sir, we are. Radhika?
Yes, sir, we are. So the first question being, as per IMF January 2021 report, India will regain the tag of fastest developing economy by 2022, after contracting about 10% in 2020. Given that the budget was expansionary in nature, do you believe it will support this growth rate? Anybody can take this question.
Yeah, if Dr. Shukla is there, I think he is the apt person to handle this, or else I would like to answer that question.
I'm
Yes.
around if you.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I think what you have seen is that the Indian economy will more likely grow at, say, anywhere between 10 to 12%. Like I said, this is going to be the fastest on record for us. We have never seen this kind of growth. Let me also tell you, for the first quarter, the Indian GDP is going to grow anywhere between 26 to 30%. So if you find 11 or 12% unbelievable, you're going to be hit by this 26 to 30% kind of growth in the first quarter itself. Like I said, I think we should not get carried away by some of these comparisons. The fastest growing, etc., do matter as headlines, but I think what this pandemic has taught all of us is that we should be also focusing on per capita income, right? So all this talk about 5 trillion, 10 trillion, 15 will happen. I mean, obviously it's bound to happen. If you bake in nominal growth rate of anywhere between, say, 10, 12%, and you use the rule of 72, the Indian economy will double every 7-8 years, right? So it's a given that we'll achieve some of these mileposts. And with a 6-7% sort of a growth rate, an economy of our size, we will always be in the top 2-3 in the world. I think the focus should be more on growing per capita incomes. Demand has been a problem in the economy. And to that extent, I think the route that the budget has taken, it's very clear. They've clearly articulated that they are going to grow the denominator, the GDP, right? If the GDP grows, all your nominal ratios, right? You've seen most of these ratios are expressed in terms of GDP, GDP being the denominator. So fiscal deficit to GDP, or whichever ratio you look at it, GDP is the denominator. I think if you grow the denominator, a lot of these issues, festering issues, employment, industrial output, some of these ratios that we keep talking about, fiscal deficit, current account deficit, etc., will get taken care of. And I think infrastructure is the way to go about it. Think about it this way. The Indian economy is a capital constrained economy. If you choose to spend money judiciously, and I gave the example of spending more money on capital expenditure, right, where the multipliers are higher in excess of 2.5. Every rupee that you spend will give you 2 to 2.5 rupees at least in return. And I think that is a good way of creating sustainable growth as well as jobs. So to that extent, yes, I do believe that the budget has given an impetus. And there are multiple themes that I spoke about: privatization, focusing on healthcare, cleaning up the financial sector, trying to get the credit growth moving. I think a lot of these measures will say give growth and impetus, absolutely no doubt. But one final comment from my side: let's not focus on the 11% or the 26% and 30%, right? These are going to be statistical pushes. A lot of it is owing to the base effect. We must focus on sustainable growth rate from the medium term perspective. So has the budget actually done that? I mean, will we grow at, say, 6-7% from FY23 onwards? I think that is the real question to answer. And I think the budget has done its bit. The only caveat I would highlight is execution. there is a lot to be done. And if we don't do that, and if the fiscal and monetary coordination doesn't happen, we will really struggle then to get the desired growth rate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for addressing that question. The next question we have is, will the structural reforms in the last 2 years, including demonetization, insolvency code, and implementation of GST, bear the fruits in the coming year?
I would like to take that question. Yes, certainly yes. Initially, these were all the challenges, the demonetization, GST, we kept talking for years, and finally 1 July 2017, it has become a reality. There have been some hiccups in terms of revising the slabs and revising the rates. Now there is a kind of gradual tuning by the businesses towards the GST. Yes, all these they had created definitely some kind of problems, but now things have become normal, and like many other developed countries which have embarked onto the GST regime, almost 130 plus countries, they were the first movers, and India has got a lot to learn from them. Yes, all these measures, though they have had some kind of setbacks and some kind of VUCA world, some letters of that acronym VUCA, people got used to that, and now it has become a normal for businesses as well as for individuals. That 86+% withdrawal of the high denomination currency has been slowly injected into the system, and now compared to the 18 lakh crores, that has been the money supply. 26 lakh crores has been the currency in circulation, as I read in the recent months. So there is more money supply. There is availability of currency through the ATMs and bank branches, and use of digital currency also has helped people not to use the currency so often as we used to have prior to 8 November 2016. So things have started moving better in the past 4-5 years, starting from the demonetization. Yes. Next question, please.
So the next question is, which industries do you think will be actual beneficiaries of the farm bills? And will the industry be able to execute their dreams of farm to fork as a result of the agri reforms?
Unfortunately, Professor Narasimhan had to attend another commitment in the form of a meeting, so he is not presently with us. So we would take and pass it over to Professor Narasimhan, and we can share this, his view or his answer to the audience.
Sure, sir. I will move on to the next question.
Yeah.
Equity markets have been buoyant for a long time now. Do you think the markets are overvalued, or it's just a time to rebalance the portfolio?
Yeah, it's a pretty good question. So yes, certain pockets are definitely getting into sort of, you can say, a valuation or on a bit of a higher trajectory. But as I said, still a lot of value available in the Indian market. So yeah, maybe time to look or maybe rebalance your portfolios, understanding your investment horizon, your risk profile and everything. Try to maybe shuffle something. If you're making a good profit somewhere in some of your investments, definitely you book some profits there. See, always remember the stock prices must have gone up drastically in last 3-4 months, right? Maybe it might be back to the pre-COVID days, but the sales or the profits of the company are not yet back to the pre-COVID days, right? I mean, there's a lag. So now if you feel that the company might not be able to achieve those kind of sales or profits earning in maybe next few quarters or next 1 year, but if the stock prices in this kind of frenzied rally that we have seen, if that stock has moved up sharply, then obviously take a call and you can move out of it. But yeah, if you still feel that the company can easily back or maybe go beyond the pre-COVID turnover, the earnings and everything, then maybe you can very well stay invested. So it's so you have to take a pretty stock specific or maybe sector specific view right now, because see, right now everyone is still skeptical, right? Economy is not doing that great. Obviously, it has recovered from the lockdown and the kind of pain that we have seen. Equity already, it always moves in anticipation 3 to 6 months in advance, right? So no doubt about it. So yes, stock prices moved up. The companies results are coming out. They are coming out good. But yes, eventually, if you feel that this is a sector, this is a company that you feel is going to be in much better shape in next 1 to 3 years time, then definitely you can stay invested. And some of the, for example, again, not a recommendation, but just to give an example, companies like Asian Paints and Levers or the TCS, they have been enjoying pretty decent high valuation throughout many years, right? So it all depends on the kind of business that you're owning or you're investing in, and what kind of outlook you have for that particular business or the company. That plays very important role. Yeah.
Yes, sir, definitely.
Yeah, I have a small question to Professor Varghese Manaloor, if he is still there. I think it is close to midnight there. Yes. So since you have familiarity of interacting with the students both in India as well as you are currently associated with Canadian University, as far as international comparison goes, do you find any contrasting, characteristics between the learning as well as teaching experience both in Canada as well as in India?
Yeah, at least
technology being the same. Technology being the same.
Yeah, I think what we are thinking of more and more is trying to engage students based on some core competencies that are there. And as Mr. Sandip mentioned, I think it's a lifelong learning process. So something like, so what can we do to help students engage on those type of activities so they don't just come to employability skills are needed, but I think the lifelong learning process is what we are trying to get to the students. And these are based on some project-based course. So as part of the curriculum itself, every student will have to engage in some form of projects in the undergrad level itself. And that is a challenge. At the same time, it is a good thing because they will be much more prepared in terms of critical thinking and communication skills. And that is something that I think lacks in some of the students that I've seen from India. The critical thinking, they can take the material and work on it and bring it back, but the thinking critically becomes a challenge. That's my feeling. Not all, but at least some of them. And I'm not saying all students here will do the same way. We have challenges with our students here too, in the Canadian context. Okay, but again, I want to mention, I'm sorry I took a little bit more time. Maybe you can blame me for it.
That's fine. That's
your
fine.
Your lunch is late, but my sleep is late too.
30 to 40 minute time slippage is natural. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And good night, sir, for you.
Good night. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. And thanks, Asha, for arranging this, and to others, all those who worked on this.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone, for a very insightful take on today's theme. I'm sure that all of us enjoyed the discussion and transfer of knowledge. It was an honor to hear your valuable thoughts on all the topics.
We'll now be concluding with the morning session of the conference and hope to see you back in the evening for more engaging discussions. Thank you once again for sparing your time and joining us this morning. Hope you all have a wonderful day ahead. With this, we complete the inaugural track and request you to join us in the evening at